cue, folks.
I didn't think you waited for anything.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 Eureka City Council Ward 5 and Mayoral Panel Questions and Answers. My name is Renee Saucedo, and I am an organizer with the National Union of Healthcare Workers and Centro del Pueblo, and I will be moderating this evening's conversation. We're very fortunate to be able to hear from all of these fine candidates this evening. We have so much at stake this election, don't we? That's why this meeting is so important. That's why everyone grew so quiet when I stood up here. We do have a lot to cover tonight, and we want to be as efficient as possible. So please, we ask that you refrain from your applause or from making comments. This is particularly important because tonight's event is being recorded or rebroadcasted on Humble Access. I'd like to start by introducing the sponsoring organizations for this evening's candidates debate. Thank you so much to the North Coast People's Alliance for bringing us together, the Humboldt Del Norte Central Labor Council, Cooperation Humboldt, Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives, Centro del Pueblo, Healthcare for All, Move to Amend, the Eureka NAACP, and North Coast Environmental Center. Thank you to these groups for putting on this evening's event. I would like to introduce the candidates for Ward 5 first. Please welcome Kim Burgell and Joe Bonino. Also give a warm welcome to our mayoral candidates, Michelle Constantine, Heidi Messner, and Susan Seaman. So just a bit more information this evening. Please know that each candidate received the questions prior to tonight's forum. This evening, our candidates will not do opening or closing. They will simply answer the questions that each organization has for them. Again, each candidate was provided with all the questions beforehand. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. And when they're down to their last 30 seconds, our timekeeper here to my right will hold up the 30-second card. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. The first question will be for Joe, and representing the Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives are Cecilia Langan and Nezzy Wade. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention, please turn off your cell phones. Please turn off your cell phones before we get started. Okay, so Cecilia and Nezzy with the Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives.
Thank you for all the candidates for showing up this evening and supporting us learning about you. Mayor can really set the tone for a city and facilitate public relations and do many things to improve things or affect the dynamics in the city. So the first question we have for the mayor candidates is, what will you do to assist?
I thought we were going with Joe.
You started with Joe? Yeah, we're going to start with Joe.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
No.
That's a different question. And Cece was going to ask that question.
Oh, okay.
But go ahead. Yeah, you can. Sorry. I'm sorry.
That's my Nezzy for you. Good evening. The 8th Council Court of Appeals has ruled that local policies criminalizing sleeping in public are illegal. Will you support a legal campground managed by a nonprofit in Eureka? And if you do not support a safe legal campground, what is your proposal solution to providing housing now to those who are homeless and being criminalized by Eureka's ordinances for sleeping in public?
Well, homelessness in California is a tremendous problem, but I think here in Eureka we've got more than our proportionate share of homeless. I feel that the City Council hasn't tried hard enough to stem the influx of new homeless that find Eureka an attractive place to live. This is really taxing our resources and the resources of the city and the county. My main focus as a councilperson would be to address the situation with sensible, workable, and non-bureaucratic solutions. I do support getting people who are willing to receive help off the streets and provide them a place to stay. Places like Adult Teen Challenge, Betty Chin's program, Rescue Mission, things like that are doing a good job of that. We need more of that. Betty Chin has some trailers that have been sitting around for a year or so and need to be cited. I think the city's been a little reluctant or haven't been trying hard enough to get those a place to be permanently, not permanently, but to be cited the same way our container village is. You could probably take another 40 or 50 or maybe even 80 people off the streets if she was to have those things cited. Of course, the problem isn't just homelessness. There's a lot of different segments to it. You have people with mental difficulties and also people with drug problems, and I think those things need to be treated in different ways.
Kim, same question? Do you want me to begin?
Sure. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that local policies criminalizing sleeping in public are illegal. Would you support a legal campground managed by a nonprofit in Eureka? And if you do not support a safe legal campground, what is your proposed solution to providing housing now to those who are homeless and being criminalized by Eureka's ordinances for sleeping in public?
Kim, you don't need to.
Oh, I don't? I'm good.
Push it back some.
Push it back. Okay, awesome. All right. Well, first, push back more.
No,
Okay. So first of all, I just want to let people know I really appreciate the efforts of all the people in our city that have worked really hard on this issue over the last several years that I've been on council and prior to that. Our city staff is constantly working on housing solutions. And recently, the city held an accessory dwelling fair to encourage folks to open up homes, those mother-in-law units in the back. There are 6,000 of those available in our city, and the goal for for this fair was to at least access 10%, which would be 60 additional units this year. Something else that's going on in our city is we have 2 projects, housing projects coming forward. One of them is going to be for veterans, and that's on 4th Street near the co-op. Secondly, there's a project it's working with their tax credits right now. It's at Myrtle and 7th, and they are working to do some senior housing. So Eureka is built out, that's the bottom line. And so though I do support Betty's trailers, which by the way are sitting there because we were threatened with a lawsuit, and so we're working through that. That's been not anything that the city has really, digressed from. They're just being responsible. But I do support Betty's trailers. That's the next section for her container village. I don't believe a campground would be better. I don't think that would be a good thing for our city. I think it would be better outside the city. Along with housing, though, we must provide support for people. And the thing is, for folks that have been houseless for a long time,
there's got to be that supportive service. There's got to be those people that are with them to help them to move in and to move forward. And the expectation that people somehow have lived on the street for 30 years. Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't see.
So now
there's the timer.
Nessie Wade will ask another question to the mayoral candidates.
Okay, sorry about that little hiccup. So back to the ambiance that the mayor can provide. What will you do to assist the city of Eureka to overcome the barriers of NIMBYism? And NIMBYism can be and often is an expressed negative commentary or behaviors, even violence towards people that are homeless. And it's now keeping people from becoming housed. So what will you do to assist the city of Eureka to overcome that?
Michelle first.
Don't move it.
No, it does hurtful.
They have a pickup pattern like this. You guys are
Don't
just
touch
fine.
anything.
Yeah.
Just because I can't talk very loud, so I've got a really bad cold, so
We
I
can
just
turn
want to
the
make
volume
sure. Okay, I'm just letting you know. I apologize. I'm trying not
No,
to cough and
that's
stuff,
good.
but it's hard. So I think NIMBYism is a product of our local leaders and staff not communicating with the residents of Eureka and business owners. And I think it will always be a bit of a challenge in such a small community. If elected, I will work with the community. I will listen to everyone's concerns and take into the consideration everyone's perspective. Ultimately, getting the community involved in decision-making processes is what will limit the amount of NIMBYism that we will see in our city.
Okay,
All
Heidi.
right. And can you hear okay with, does this work? Okay. All right. Well, I have worked with and supported Betty Chin, Eureka Rescue Mission, Adult Teen Challenge. I have voted for Waterfront Recovery to come into the city of Eureka. I personally had multiple people live with me throughout the years who were facing homelessness, including a family of 5. There's a problem, this is a problem for all of us. We, as Joe mentioned earlier, this is a problem across California. We have 50% of the state, or of the nation's homeless right now. And this is an issue that we are looking at not only at a city level and a county level, but also at a state level. We are in constant, I must be wasting my time if we're not working on this, because I've spent so many hours and so many trips around the state trying to discover ways in which we can do this the best and collaboratively. So for me, I think that it's a problem of sticking our head in the sand. We often just tend to do that as human beings. We stick our head in the sand until it begins to affect us. And so we have to help people understand that what the issues are, to be educated, to work collaboratively and compassionately to address all members of this community so that we can care for correctly depending on the homeless situation. There are many different aspects to homelessness. So there might be a criminal element, deal with that completely differently than a mental health issue element that might be happening. Most people don't understand that a good portion of the women and children on the street are there because of violence against them. And so every individual has to be worked with specifically according to what their reasons for being on the street are.
Susan?
Thank you. So I always like to find a place where we can start with the commonality, and I think that we can all agree on the magnitude of this problem. This is a problem that everybody recognizes as something that we need to deal with. And so when we're talking about creating a narrative, we start with what we all agree with, but I think what we need to talk about now is less about how big the problem is and more specifics about what we need. So when we're framing the narrative, we need to talk about how many beds do we need and how many of those beds need to have substance abuse treatment support associated with them, and how many of them need to have mental health associated with them. That way, when we're approaching a new project, we can talk about how that is effectively addressing the issue. So I think that's one way we could start to change the way we talk about it, is by talking about each project and what that will do towards the bigger one. The other thing is, I think the city either needs a new plan or they need to be clearer about what their plan is. They came in with one a year or two ago, but it's sort of, I think it's sort of changed. I'm not exactly sure what's going on right now. So I think we need to be clear, and we need to be clear on what the city's role is and what the county's role will be. The city and the county have very different things that they need to do. We need to partner and collaborate with the county when we can, and we really need to hold them accountable when they're not doing what needs to be done in the city. The last thing is, we need to have early conversations. We've learned lessons, I think, both with Betty Chin and with the village in Arcata, that people do not like to feel rushed about these decisions, but we need to be quick also. So we need to find that balance between quick and rush, and those are some of the ways I would address the NIMBYism problem.
Thank you to all of you. For the next question, we'd like to welcome up Emily Velez, representing Central del Pueblo. And Kim will be the first to answer this question.
Thank you for having us here and for being here. I wanted to ask if you support Measure K, which is the Humboldt County sanctuary measure.
I do. I support Measure K. I think it is important for folks to feel safe. No human being is illegal. No human being is illegal. We need to remember that. Instead of tearing families apart, I believe it's important to create and support people into citizenship. And California is already a citizen, or is a sanctuary state. And I appreciate in our area we actually have a program, English Express, who works to provide these opportunities. So I absolutely support Measure T.
Okay,
Michelle, oh, I'm sorry, we're gonna take a different order. Michelle?
So Measure K.
No, I do not support Measure K. I believe it's a false sense of security because we're already a sanctuary state. I do not think that our local government can afford to go against our local government can afford to go against the federal government. And I don't think that it's going to promote safety for these people. I think that being a sanctuary state, we need to let the state take care of the federal government, and if there's immigration issues, they need to work with them. As a mom, I do not support removing children from their families. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And what I really think is we just need a better path to citizenship for everybody.
Heidi?
Well, we have dear friends who were raised in the U.S. after their father was given amnesty from the Philippines during his assistance with American soldiers during World War II. And after their father died in the 1990s, the adult children and the wife were all deported back to the Philippines. It was my first encounter with the need for immigration reform in the United States. And it's unfortunate that the community, that the federal government has not put this as a top priority, because it really is an issue that hardworking, tax-paying community members are treated unfairly. And that's a critical piece for all of us, that people are treated fairly and with respect and with honor. Our governor has made California a sanctuary city, or a sanctuary state. And due to the current political climate, I voted to put in a resolution to protect every member of our community in Eureka, to which the Eureka Police Department already has agreed, and that is something that we put in almost 2 years ago now. So it is something that I truly care about, every human being, every person that is here, that we are all treated fairly.
Susan?
So I will be voting yes on Measure K. And I understand that the Eureka Police Department does have a policy, and it says it's good policy, and it was a really good effort. But the national climate right now really, I think, demands that we make a concerted decision about how we treat immigrants. I feel like we have to say that we are not going to condone the harassment of documented citizens and legal citizens, and we're absolutely not going to condone the torture of undocumented citizens. So although there are things like the fact that we're a sanctuary state that already sort of oversees this, and the fact that federal could come in anyways, I really feel like this is important that we make a statement. This is who we are, and also celebrate what immigrants bring to this community and to America in general. And so I wanted to mention too, when I was growing up, I watched Schoolhouse Rock, because that's how old I am. And you know what? It wasn't an accurate portrayal of America. I mean, there's lots of things that we can find that were not accurate, but it was aspirational. And so I grew up believing that we were a country who was big and powerful, and with that, we took care of people. And I feel like we just need to hold on to that until our country realizes that that's who we are again.
I don't support Measure K. We've already got a sanctuary state here in California, and the sheriff has pledged to follow those state law, which is what he should do. At the same time, the sheriff has objected to the increased cost and paperwork required by Measure K. You know, I'm not an expert on what the sheriff has to do, but I take his word for it. I think he knows his job. If you look on the written part of Measure K, you know, page 10, page 12, page 13, all have paragraphs in them that are going to increase staff time and paperwork. I work at HSU. I know what that's all about. Anytime you have an extra thing of paperwork, it's going to take somebody some extra hours to get it done and pull all the information together. And it's, you know, somebody has to pay that staff time, and the county's already strapped, and you know, because that's why they had to have Measure Z and all that. So I don't really think that's an effective use of the sheriff's budget at this time. Page 14 claims that somehow there won't be any lawsuits filed over this. I'm not an attorney, but I somehow find that hard to believe. So I think that you know, right now, if there's a lawsuit, it's going to be the state that's going to be having to deal with it and have to pay any claims. But if we institute our own county one, guess what? We're all going to be paying those claims and paying those attorneys to defend this thing ourselves instead of the state. So I don't support it.
Okay, the next question will be asked by Mike Hedeker, representing the Central Labor Council. And the first person to respond will be Michelle.
Good evening. Would you support a living wage ordinance for the city of Eureka?
Right now, I'm not in support of a living wage ordinance, only because California has already instituted a higher minimum wage, and the increase has affected some businesses negatively. And after looking at this a little bit further and not seeing a real clear definition of what a living wage is, it's different from one person to another. I would need more information before I would go behind proposed ordinance.
Heidi?
All right, well, first of all, I'd like to ask how you define a livable wage. It's something that is, when median houses are $850,000 in one city in our state and $250,000 in Eureka, it makes it difficult to know what that actually means. And California's minimum wage increases are already very aggressive over the next few years. I don't think that it's wise to outpace that. I think that when I look at a city like SeaTac, who did that, implemented a 15-hour minimum wage for businesses simply moved out of the city. and it actually eliminated jobs. So the very thing we're looking for may not be the wisest thing. I think that California's determination to do it over a period of time was wise. I think that was smart to give people a chance to think that through and how they're going to do that. And we don't want to have businesses eliminated from our city. We have many cities right around us. So unless this is something we look at as a whole that's much bigger than just a city, I do not think that it is a wise move to do that.
Susan?
So when I work in there, I talk a lot about jobs and how important they are. I talk to a lot of industry leaders and even employers say that one of our greatest weaknesses in Humboldt County is that we're at a competitive disadvantage for the wages that we pay. That said, I also could not support a citywide minimum, living wage, which I'm assuming is a new minimum wage. I could possibly look at a county-wide one, but there is no advantage to the city of Eureka to impose a minimum wage where somebody can go just right outside the city walls. We are just starting to get businesses who want to come here, and we really need to foster that. What I do want to do is really remind businesses the importance of investing in their employees. We have a lot of businesses who really understand the importance of buying the best ingredients for their products. They're going to do the best craftsmanship, and then they want to pay the least that they can for their employees. And I would like them to understand that you're at a competitive advantage for the best employees when you pay the best wages. So I'd really like to make it an educational moment for them. And also I would like as a city to identify and celebrate those businesses who do support the higher wages. We do have great ones out there, and let's celebrate those. And work on every way we can to raise the level of wage in our community, but a citywide minimum wage I think would be a disadvantage to us.
Joe?
I don't support the living wage proposal. As of January 1st, 2023, the minimum wage in California will be $15, and that's just 4 years from now. It'll disadvantage the businesses in Eureka tremendously. You know, that'd be no reason for anybody to even open a business here if that came about. Also, it's very difficult to pin down what's a living wage. You know, a guy with 6 kids has a different living wage than, you know, somebody with just 1 kid or myself who has no kids. So that how do you know, where do you draw those lines? What's a living wage for people? The other situation is that besides the definition, is that, you know, that's what unions are for. That's why people join unions, is to get better benefits and better wages. So, you know, I mean, if you want to, you know, hit the union movement and knock them back further than they've already been knocked, pass this thing, because then why would somebody join a union? There's no reason to join a union if there's already a government mandated living wage. I'm a member of the union at HSU, and you know, they do provide a very good service, and they represent us very well. So my feeling is, I'd say support the union movement. Don't have living wage laws.
Kim. So I actually, when I first ran for office, worked very vigilantly with the MAYORAL campaign, which was to support a living wage for our city, and that failed. And I think one of the reasons that failed had to do with it being just in our city. I think that if we had a county-wide ordinance, it may have made a difference. I support a fair wage. You know, I know a lot of single moms out there that work 1 to 2 jobs to support their kids. So, you know, I think that it's important that we consider them as well. And I love the idea of investment in our employees. And I work at Eureka High, I'm part of that union, and they do take care of me. I make an almost living wage, almost, you know. And I think it is hard to define, but I think that we need to consider that there are people out there currently working 1 or 2 jobs that can barely afford their rent, that can barely afford their food, that are going to food for people to get their food or getting vouchers for their kids. And I think that we need to continue this conversation and to continue to move forward and look at this over and over again. You know, we say $15 is a fair wage. I don't know. I think it does depend on the person, and we need to really look at that.
For the next question, Ruthie Engelke will represent Cooperation Humboldt, and we'll start this time with Heidi.
Cooperation Humboldt is piloting a series of alternative economic approaches to give our community sustainable, non-exploitive options based on our interdependence, including establishing a public bank, exploring options for cooperative housing and worker co-ops, and empowering communities to raise more of their own food. Would you be willing to meet regularly with us to explore policy changes to facilitate this work?
Absolutely. I love hearing ideas and looking for creative and sustainable solutions to any of the challenges we face. In regard to all of these things that you mentioned, I love the fact that you are actively working toward seeing people raise their own food and doing things that we can actually sustain ourselves. I think that's really important. One of the things that you brought up was even that cooperative housing, something that I've worked on in the past in other places to create those kinds of communities. And also, then you mentioned the public bank. In regard to the public bank, there's one state that has done this. It's the only example that we have of this. And Los Angeles County is now considering it. So in regard to that, I'm watching with interest to see how that's handled and how it plays out before I really consider it for our city, which is quite a bit smaller as well. But absolutely, I'd love to hear what you guys have and love to cooperate with you guys on hearing what your ideas are.
Susan?
So this local investing in particular, so I'm going to expand on this a little bit, is something that I have been having conversations about for several years with our work at AEDC. We've done several local investments that have made amazing projects happen, things like Open Door and the Carson Block building were made possible by pooling local funding. And so we've looked into other ways like Lion Clubs, which are local investment networks and investment clubs. So I'm already a little bit of a geek about stuff like this. From what I understand, the local bank, which is intriguing, I've heard 2 stories now. I've heard one that it's a city bank, which doesn't seem to make as much sense as a regional bank, which is what we had discussed before. So a regional bank, and it's not just about a place to put cannabis money, but it's about having a place where cities and communities can borrow cheaper money to do public projects. I'm intrigued by it. Nebraska is a whole state, but it's a small state. So regionally, we could probably meet them in terms of population. I have no idea if it would work, but I'm definitely interested in continuing those conversations. We've also, AEDC had a successful housing co-op long enough ago that it has paid itself off. Now all of the members are paying money in that is going to keep the places up. I love the prospect of co-op housing. Right now, some of the basic things haven't penciled out, but with public-private partnerships, I think we can make that happen with more local investing. So, yes, I'm happy with my conversations.
Joe?
Well, as a council person, I would look forward to meeting everybody. I like meeting people. That's why I like going door to door during these campaigns. I've been doing that since 1986. I've been on the planning commission for 5 years, and that's one of the problems with being on the planning commission is it's kind of lonely. Nobody comes to see you. They all come to see Kim and the other council members. So very few people have, but you really don't get that that same interaction. So I look forward to doing that with everybody, especially the people that run Cooperation Humboldt, who happen to live a couple doors away from me, so it'll be easy for them to come visit. I don't want to prejudge any of their ideas, but I did just want to mention that Humboldt County does already have several public banks. They're called credit unions. I worked at Coast Central for 5 years. They take the community's money and aggregate it, and they loan it out, and they invest it in the community, and then it comes back to the people in the community as dividends. There's no corporate investors or anything like that there that suck up all the profits. It all stays right here in the county. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I'm sure if people approach the credit unions around here, that there's something that might be worked out. Regarding growing your own food, that's great too, but not everybody's got a green thumb, so that can be a little problematic for some people. So anyways, but I would definitely welcome all kinds of input from everybody.
Kim. So I think I've proven this, but I'm always willing to meet and discuss policy options to improve our community with people that agree with me, people that disagree with me. I've been pretty open and available for those kinds of things. I don't really believe that there are any bad ideas in brainstorming. I think it's really important to look at ideas that people bring forward, and some of them may work, some of them may not work. I like the idea of creating a more sustainable community where people are empowered to do things for themselves. That's one of the things actually that I appreciate about Neighborhood Watch, which really isn't about what we're talking about, but it empowers people to take control of their neighborhood. Just as growing your own food empowers you to be more sustainable in your home, just as potential public bank could sustain our region. There are so many different options out there, and I think it's important to be open-minded and to consider what the possibilities are.
Michelle?
So I absolutely support people growing their own food. I love seeing all the community gardens throughout our town. I think that growing your own food gives people an appreciation for where their food comes from and a sense of value. Seeing the fruit of your labor it's really exciting. I grow a garden at my home, and I encourage my kid and all the neighbor kids to always grow whatever, even if they don't have a green thumb. I think it's just really important for people to try to get involved in growing their own food in any way, shape, or form. I think it's really crucial. It builds a stronger community. So those community gardens, are really an asset because it brings people together. And I think that's really crucial. I'm very intrigued by cooperative housing, and I'd like to hear more about that. And as well with the public bank, I know that LA is going to be putting that to a vote, and I'd really like to see where that goes. And I'm more than happy to meet with people that, like Kim, I'm always ready to sit down with people who agree with me, don't agree with me. As long as we can have an open conversation, I'm more than willing to hear what you have to say.
Catherine Donahue will ask the next question on behalf of Healthcare for All.
I would like to thank you all for being here tonight. It's nice to be able to meet the candidates, so thank you for being here. The question is, do you support or not a single-payer, improved Medicare for All healthcare system for California and in this county and in this country? If yes, how will you actively work in your political capacity to move this issue forward? If no, what do you see as the alternative way for healthcare access for all, and how can that be realized?
And we will start with Susan this time.
I am just waiting for single-payer healthcare. It can't come fast enough for me. I have 2 kids in their 20s, and every year they get closer to 26. I don't know how my son's going to afford his asthma medicine, which is already expensive with insurance. And if my daughter is going to be able to continue to get the medicine she needs to work. So I also have sick kids. It's a very, very scary time for me. So I support it wholly, but also from an economic standpoint, the economy right now, one of our fastest growing size businesses is single employee, or single owner, no employee, basically independent contractors. And according to many studies, they're saying that up to 50% of people in America, 50% of the workforce in America will be independent contractors in some way by 2020, which is just a few years. So if you've got people who are earning a living and they're not working for a company, how are we going to expect to sustain the healthcare the way it is right now? Additionally, it's a burden on businesses. It doesn't make sense to me when businesses want to continue to offer healthcare instead of having single payer. It's not only very expensive, its costs change constantly. You're always having to shop for it. It's difficult to understand. It would relieve businesses of a huge burden. So obviously I would support it. I would work with the appropriate entities and agencies to move forward in any discussions. You know, obviously it's not a city council decision to do that, but any conversation I can have to move this forward through the state or to promote it, I would take advantage of it.
Joe?
I don't support single payer. I think if you have a problem with the cost of health insurance, we need to have more competition, not less. Just having one person provide it, we think it's expensive now, and wait till everybody just has to have one system. I think definitely, you know, there again, you know, unions provide great insurance and provide a really good source of insurance. You want to hurt the union movement, go to single payer. No reason for anybody to join a union anymore because there's no reason for anybody to negotiate for good union benefits. I understand that there is a problem with, of course, people who are don't have a business or don't belong to a business that has a union. That's why I favor a situation where maybe people could buy into Medicare. You know, that's something Richard Nixon, you know, wanted to do that back in 1970. But it didn't pass. The other thing is to, you know, AARP runs an insurance system for elderly people. Well, you know, why isn't there just an insurance system just for people who don't have any kids? So they don't have to have, why would they need insurance for children? They don't need that, so they could have a cheaper policy. You know, there should be a policy for people who are, you know, maybe, you know, have different needs and different requirements, and they should be able to be tailored for all kinds of different people. So that's my feeling is we need insurance policies that are tailored for each person, and of course you have to have be able to cross state lines, which you can't do right now with those. But I'm in favor of that. Those type of plans would everybody could have their own sort of plan, and I think being nationwide, it would be affordable. And so more competition is what we need. Locally, for the situation here, I would definitely push to get Kaiser up here. That's one thing I would work on right away.
Kim?
Well, I believe that healthcare is a right. I believe that everybody deserves healthcare. Everybody, irregardless. It's sad to me when I see people and have family members that won't go to the doctor because they don't have insurance. And then they find out months later that they've been really sick. It's a horrible, horrible thing. So I absolutely support single-payer health care. The things that I have done already, I've spent a lot of time walking and marching and talking about single-payer health care with a lot of the nurses here locally. And I was also a part of the resolution that the city of Eureka came forward to support single-payer health care. And I think it's a critical piece to our culture and our society. If other people can do it, so can we.
Michelle?
I don't believe this is too much of a local issue. I'm not sure what I could do as a mayor, but what I do know is that I believe our country has a lot of work to do with our health care for everyone. And I don't think that the state can afford single-payer health care right now. But personally, I do know people that have been affected by their medical bills and are in debt. And I don't think that pre-existing conditions should prevent people from getting treatment or medicine. What I do support is a national health care for all, and I think that that's what we need to work towards, and I think that's something that I'm happy to encourage, but as a mayor, I don't really know how much influence I'd actually have on that.
Heidi?
All right. Well, I absolutely agree that healthcare is a right, not just a choice. I think that everyone deserves healthcare, no matter what. We all deserve to be healthy and whole. My biggest challenge is how do we pay for it? I have lived around the world, actually, and I have lived in countries where there is a healthcare plan for everyone, and it's up to 70% of their taxes actually go to the state or to their country to be able to pay for that. And so I'm not sure that we're ready for that. But it is an interesting thing. How do you balance the care for everybody and ensuring that everyone has health care and not paying up to 70% of our paycheck to make sure that happens. So I really would like to continue to move forward in any way possible, any conversation that looks at sustainability and looks at the issues that we have right now with insurance. Insurance is a huge issue. In Seattle, one of the things that people did was we actually cooperated together. We talk about cooperatives. It was a healthcare cooperative where the healthcare system, they determined not to use insurance and go back to paying doctors directly and working with doctors directly. And it was actually very effective and allowed for people to work together within the community itself. So there's a lot of different ways that things like this could happen, but I think it is a huge, huge issue. If it was easily solvable, we would have done it by now.
With the next question, we'll start with Joe. Cole will represent Move to Amend.
Move to Amend represents the We the People amendment, which states that money is not speech and that human beings, not corporations, are persons entitled to constitutional rights. Are you willing to sign the pledge to amend? And what will you do at the local level to ensure that our democracy works for everyday people and not the 1%?
Well, I won't be signing the Move to Amend. I don't think that donations don't control how people vote. Reasoned arguments control how people vote. So you could have all the money in the world on one side, but if you don't have the argument on your side, you're not going to win anyways. And that's been shown to happen a lot here in California. There's also an ex-state assemblyman told me an interesting story, and he said this is really true. When he first got into the legislature back in 64 or 66, said the old guys told him, if you can't take their money at night and then vote against them in the morning, you don't belong in politics. And that's basically the way I see it. So that's, there's really, that if you're that type of politician who can stand up that way, then this is totally unnecessary. Now, locally, we do have limits on how much people can give to try to keep the arms race from getting out of hand. Eureka here has a $500 limit. That seems to work pretty well. Arcata has, I think theirs is like $173 or something like that. Theirs is really minimal. But and then of course California has limits on how much you can give as an individual or a business, and I think those things work out pretty well. But I will not be signing the Move to Amend.
Kim?
Well, I would absolutely sign a pledge that money and corporations aren't speech. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to think that corporations are people. It's ridiculous. So what I plan to do is I'm just going to continue to work to represent the everyday people in my community, just like I've been doing the last 4 years as a council member. And I feel like being available to people, listening to people's concerns, and being willing to advocate for people has been a really important piece.
Michelle?
I think locally we've already kind of moved in this direction. We have the $500 limit per person during a campaign. And I do think we should limit contributions on a state and national level, just to ensure that everybody has a fair chance, no matter their economic status, to run for political office. But I think this is a really important question. I'm not sure if I'm willing to sign it right now. I'd like to see more about it. I'm not sure of what there could be unforeseen consequences, and I'd just like to know a little bit more before I sign something and pledge to agree to something like this.
Heidi?
So we have worked really hard to help control this issue within our city, and I believe that we're at a good place right now for that. I agree at that larger level that there are some problems for sure, and there are limitations, and it's a concern. At this time in our city, the thing that we have, I believe, makes it a practical and easy way for anyone who wants to run to be able to. But at these larger levels, I think one of the issues that we need to address is policy. And we can't do that outside of our city unless we're involved in policy making. And one of the things that is critical, I believe, in leadership is to understand policy and how to influence that. It's one of the reasons why during the last 2 years I've worked with League of California Cities that goes before legislature specifically to advocate for these things, and why I've been appointed to the Resolutions Committee at the League of California Cities, and why I was just asked to be on the board that interacts with the Coastal Commission for the coastal cities. I believe that's the one way we can influence, and it's the one way that we actually have the ability to make changes that are necessary for these kinds of issues.
Susan?
So I think that Citizens United was a terrible decision. I think it was a result of, and it continues to create more growing income inequality. I think it could all be tied pretty much to that. I signed the pledge. I'm currently, since I'm endorsed by North Coast People's Alliance, signed the pledge not to take money from businesses. It's a little difficult. Makes some of my donors a little frustrated, but I understand the concept behind it. I don't know that it's necessary when the maximum donation is $500, but I get that there's a principle to it, and I think that that's fair to request a change to get away from corporate money. But one of the other things you asked in the question was about how would we make sure that more than the 1% is heard in our community. And what I would really be interested in doing, one of my key platform positions, is to make sure that our committees and our commissions are filled with a diverse population that represents everybody. And everybody is a lot more than 1%. So that, I think, is probably the strongest position that a mayor has, is that ability to get those voices to the table. And I think that is the best way to reach a broad community.
Sharon Blanc, representing the NAACP, will ask the next question. And Kim will be the first to respond.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. What specific experience do you have in addressing systemic racism? And based on your experience, what specific initiatives and actions will you develop to address systemic racism in Eureka and Humboldt County?
So frankly, I don't have a lot of experience addressing systematic racism or systemic racism. I generally deal with this one situation or one person at a time, and that's the same with stigma. I have been working hard to return the island back to the Weout tribe. I've been working on that for 3 years. I feel like that's an opportunity to heal our city and to build a bridge between communities in that regard. I'm happy to meet with anybody with ideas on how to address the overall systemic problem that we have here with racism and stigma at the city level, and my number's everywhere, so feel free to call me. Michelle?
Excuse me. Personally, I have not dealt with systemic racism, but I have dealt with discrimination for being a woman and for my age. And it can be really challenging sometimes. I don't think that discrimination of any kind is acceptable. And if I was elected mayor, I would make sure if any discrimination of any kind that came to me, I would address it immediately. I don't think it should be tolerated. I don't think it's acceptable. And I think we can build bridges and develop a safety net for people. I think people should be able to feel comfortable with where they live and where they work.
Heidi?
All right, well, I actually have experienced racism quite a bit. I was the minority, the only white girl in India growing up. I am a white female pastor, which is also often a problem for many people. I've spent a lifetime of not only experiencing, but also addressing these issues. In the Philippines, over 1 million people of 3 generations lived in the garbage dumps, and were considered unworthy of even being counted as human beings, counted in any kind of census. And I spent 10 years helping implement a system specifically where over 100 communities now have housing, have healthcare, have education, and jobs. I've not only experienced it, I've worked in creating systems to address it, working on real change and systemic change. So I do believe that I have a lot of experience in this, not only personally, but also in working toward the greater good of the whole. On strategies to do just some of the things that I've done overseas in our city and in our county. And it's one of the reasons why I am running, because I believe that we can do this, and it's why the last 2 years I've been working so collaboratively with so many different relationships, because that's what it takes to make real change.
So when I was in college, I did an internship in the summer at a newspaper called Black Voice News. Mostly I covered a train derailment that happened in one of our poorest communities down in Southern California where I lived. And you'd think maybe that gave me some great insight. It was a great internship. But it wasn't until I started working for my other local newspaper after I graduated that I think I really noticed how, especially the media, can get distracted. We all know what we know, and that's what we're comfortable with. And so I was assigned, even though I lived in a very diverse community, personality profile, one after another, and they were all white men. They were, they were the head of the chamber, they were the head of the Rotary, they owned businesses. And I went to the editor and I said, could we try to expand this a little bit and maybe do some stories on people who reflect the community a little bit better? And I did get somebody who was a lovely man of color who was the head of Rotary. So it was a baby step. It was not a great systemic change, but it was a big change for me because, like I said, it really helped me realize our own biases and comfort levels and how it's difficult to reach out. And that is, again, why, and I'll return to this many, many times, I think that one of my most important things I can do as mayor is make sure we have voices on commissions and committees, including like the Planning Commission and the Police Oversight Committee, that really reflects the community in a way that their voices are heard, because I can't speak for people. I need to bring them to the table.
Joe?
All forms of systematic and habitual discrimination and racism are wrong. Over the past couple of decades, as an employee at HSU, I've participated in several trainings on discrimination that they give on a periodic basis. HSU has placed a special emphasis for us bureaucrats. I was a bureaucrat at HSU working in payroll, being mindful of treating everyone equally. Okay, and that's something that sometimes people forget about, and we've been very impressed to do that. Now, that of course, that kind of means that you don't necessarily get treated well by the bureaucrats, but everyone gets treated equally badly. So, anyways, but no, it's just a joke. We treat everybody great at HSU. I pledge to be very respectful of all people that come to the city council and come to City Hall. That's definitely my way of dealing with it. And just one last note, I know people, Kim mentioned how they have returned the island to the Indians, a Native American tribe there, the Wiots, and one thing she didn't tell you though is that the Indian island is zoned natural resources, so there's really nothing they can do with it. So, it seems like a great gesture, but they can't develop it at all. So,
on behalf of the North Coast People's Alliance, Caroline Griffith will ask the next question, and Michelle will be the first one to respond.
Do you support California's Proposition 10, which would restore local control for cities and counties to create rent stabilization ordinances?
I do not support Prop 10 because while it may help in larger cities, I think it will hurt us here locally in Eureka. It will de-incentivize property owners and developers from creating more rental properties and maintaining the ones they currently have. And I don't believe that the government should be telling people what they should charge for their property. What we really need is more rentals in Eureka.
Heidi?
Right, well, economics are a matter of supply and demand. While I don't believe rent should be raised, allowed to be raised overnight and with no limits to rental amounts, I've also seen the effects of rent control, and what I've seen is actually really not pretty. Generally, over time, what happens is homeowners cannot maintain care for rentals and results in slum housing, which is not good for anyone. I do have concerns when it comes to what rent control and livable wage means. I mentioned that earlier, for the backs of those who seem to be carrying it, but I also believe in a city like Eureka, we have the ability to put into place reasonable laws that will care for every individual. Care for those who are renting, care for those who are owning rentals, and who need housing who can't afford housing, including mental health issues or some of these that really can't afford to work, and that would assist our citizens most effectively and probably more effectively, I believe, than Prop 10. But I do believe that we have to care and make sure that we are taking care of every single individual. And that is a much bigger question than just Prop 10. I think there are some unforeseen consequences that I've seen in the past with rent control that I would not like to see in our community, and that's some of my concerns about it.
Susan?
So I support the repeal of the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, but only because blanket policies that cross the whole state don't always work. Sometimes Humboldt has been on the end where it doesn't work. Sometimes it's another community. So I always think that it's fair when communities can decide what they need to do themselves. That said, my housing priorities are to create more housing. That's really what we need. And we need to improve our substandard housing, which is a big issue right now. So rent control does not support those two ideas. There's a difference between affordable housing, which is a mandated kind of a government housing, and housing that is affordable. And what we need right now in Humboldt County is market rate housing. And we are trying so hard to get developers to develop, and they just are not. There's so many regulations, it's so expensive for them to develop that even by the time they build the first piece of a frame, they're already almost priced out of the housing, what they can charge for rent. And so we don't need to make it more difficult, but what we do need to do is we need to saturate. We need to put in infill wherever we can, which the city is working on ADU units and tiny houses. I'm working with the senior resource, or Area 1 on Aging to do a NEST program, which is home share. And I'm very interested in ways that people can get access to buying housing, like co-ops or smaller areas. So there's lots of things we can do to support housing, and it's a priority.
Joe?
I don't support Proposition 10. It's going to be counterproductive. Rent control is not just going to be a problem for a number of places to rent around here in the long run. It's going to be a very big problem in the very near short term. Rental availability will go down. I mean, how many of you have been here looking for an apartment in Eureka? It's kind of tough, huh? Especially if you have a dog or a cat. No new construction will occur, and this even allows rent control on houses also. So, you know, family houses. This is going to be a complete disaster. It's going to have a chilling effect on the market. Here again, you know, it's just going to kick the unions in the teeth again, because it's going to be bad for the construction trades, bad for unions, bad for real estate employees, bad for maintenance men, roofers, painters, and especially bad for people who are in that lower income area that don't fit into the affordable housing scenario. So that's it's just a bad deal. Now the council is already making plans to start up with rent control as soon as this passes. I mean, they'll pass rent control faster than Bob's your uncle. This will, basically what this will do is this will completely throw into the ash can all the work that the city staff and planning department has done to try to make the central core area more dense with more apartments and places to live. You know, there's not going to be any more construction. Let me tell you that this is going to completely put an end to all this stuff. The whole idea of trying to put in ADUs, people are why do that? You're not going to be able to maintain them if you can't raise the rents over time to cover new roofs and new plumbing and new structural improvements. So, or even to rehab a place. So, no, it's bad news.
Kim?
So I support local control, and that's the reason that I support this. I think it's really important for our city to be able to make their own decisions. I think blanket policies statewide have created problems for us. So I think each community should be able to decide for itself how to adjust rents and other items in our state.
Okay, we have 2 more questions to go this evening. The next question will be divided up between the Ward 5 candidates and the mayoral candidates. Larry Glass will ask both questions on behalf of the North Coast Environmental Center.
Good evening. Before I ask my question, like I did last night, I want to thank all of you for stepping up. No matter what your political persuasion or your motives, public service is one of the most important things we can do as a citizen. It's what makes democracy work, so thank you very much. Okay, first to the city council candidates. Right now I'm the executive director of the North Coast Environmental Center. In 2008 I was on the city council, and I helped broker a deal between the city of Eureka and environmental groups to stop the city from routinely using herbicides throughout the city. The city's actually lived up to that now for a decade. But right now, city staff is planning to a project that would spray an invasive reed along the waterfront, and it'd be violation of the agreement that we had that makes herbicide use the last resort. And they're doing that because they screwed up and they used mechanical means and then didn't bother to follow up with it, and it basically spread this reed further than it would have already. So what would you do as a city council person?
And we will go in the order of Joe and then Kim.
Okay. All right. I do not support herbicide spraying on the bay or anywhere. There are other ways of doing weed abatement. You know, of course, you can use your own hoe and whatnot and try to get them out. I am Italian. My grandfathers used to use vinegar on the weeds. That was how they got rid of the weeds. My grandmothers, they used to pour the boiling hot water from the pasta on the weeds. And this is really a good trick because it really gets down into the cracks, so especially the sidewalks. So if any of you guys want to try that, it does work. Also, finally, there's another way to do it that the old railroad guys will tell you. You just use burn them with a blowtorch. That pretty much takes care of those weeds if you just you know just burn them. So, and also I just want to let you know that yeah, since I am Italian, I brought some biscotti there. I baked some, so afterwards.
Kim? Well, I oppose using herbicides on the bay, in our town, at my house, everywhere. You know, unless it's like some really random, unusual, like crazy reason, which I can't imagine what that would be. As a mom, I'm super concerned about our environment and keeping it healthy for the future for my kids.
And now we have a question for the mayoral candidates.
Yes. So one of the most important functions, I think, that the mayor performs is appointing boards and appointing members to serve on the boards and commissions. Right now, the city's planning commission, as a bad example, lacks any diversity at all. It's all white dudes and developers, you know. So what would you do would you pledge to add socioeconomic and gender diversity to the local boards and commissions?
And we'll go in the order of Heidi, Susan, and Michelle.
I absolutely love that you're the one asking this question, Larry. I believe in appointing qualified candidates to positions as well as having a wide range of voices at the table. I think that if we do not listen to all the voices, then we haven't heard all the aspects that are important to make on decisions. I think it's critical. It's one of the reasons why over the last 2 years that I've been on council, there have been some kind of rejected candidates for that reason, not because they weren't qualified, but because wanting to see that more diversity on these groups. I have seen it happen over and over again where, in fact, I'll give you an example. When I was in college, we had a group of men create the new, kind of what you described, the new college facility that we were moving into. And when the plans were presented to us, there were absolutely not even one closet in the entire place, and no woman would have ever let that happen. So I was 19 when that happened, and I saw something that stuck in my memory about how critical it is that we have all voices at the table. So yes, I absolutely will continue to move toward bringing greater diversity on all of our commissions. And
Susan?
boards. And boards. Don't want to leave them out either.
Thank you. Susan?
Yes. By the time I got to this, I was like, I just said this like so many times. So yes, it is a priority for me, obviously. I think it's one of the most important things we can do. So I thought maybe I'd just give a couple of examples of why I think it would. I was knocking on doors the other day, and I met this woman. She was 80 years old, and she said, I really want to go out, that the public transportation is so difficult and it's hard for me to get across the street. It's really dangerous. The bus route is on the other side. And it was a voice that I think is very important because we have a lot of older people who have to rely on public transportation, who have to walk, who really are in situations that they are affected by the transportation safety stuff that we do. We need to have their voice on that table, at that table. We have a historic preservation commission, which is wonderful because we have these great historic homes, but we also have a lot of people who don't have a really high income. So if they come and they move into a house and they can't afford to fix it up to the standards of the Historic Preservation Commission, they then have to pay like $600 to file an amendment to not do that. So I think having the voice of somebody who maybe isn't as affluent, who might understand the needs of somebody who's trying to just take care of their house would be a good one on that board. I think on the Police Oversight Committee, we might want to have some people who are not huge police fans. I think that if something ever happens, it actually, to hold the police accountable, will make it easier for the police in the future because you can trust them more if you know somebody is watching out for them. So those are some examples.
Michelle.
I am 100% for the most qualified person getting the job or position regardless of gender, race, religion, or socioeconomic status. We all have jobs to do. And if you're the right person for the job and you're willing to do the job, that's what it should be, the decision should be based on. I think diversity is one of the most important things that you can have in governing. And if I'm elected, I will do whatever is in my power to make sure that the most qualified person gets the position.
I get to ask the last question, and we will start with Susan for your responses. There have recently been a host of claims and news stories related to public health issues that have been based on misinformation and subjective opinions. If elected, you will be responsible for creating and upholding public policy. How will you ensure that your policies are rooted in facts and data? And how will you respond to news stories or community claims that are based on faulty logic, emotion, or propaganda? Susan.
Okay, so in that question, I think they're talking about a very specific issue, which might be needle exchange. And as I've answered for many needle exchange questions, I'm very much for looking at the science. I've never claimed to be a health professional, so I turn to them. But really the bigger question of how do you figure out what's right and what's wrong in the media. I've mentioned before, I have a journalism background. That's very important to me. When I worked for Heat TV, I taught media literacy for many years, and I'm very interested in high school journalism. And the reason is because when you teach people how to make media, they understand how it can be manipulated. Media literacy is incredibly important. So what is that? The best defense is just really understanding what your best offense is and knowing how to find what's true and what's not. Unfortunately, what I do doesn't necessarily mean the next person is going to look up and be scientifically accurate. So you just have to continue to respond with facts. The other thing is, as mayor, one of the things I would really do is advocate for transparency with the media. That's something that the city of Eureka in particular hasn't been great about. It's been a little better in the past few years, but there was a time when they responded to media questions with silence, and I think that looks suspicious, and it doesn't breed trust. So I think that is an important thing for the city as well.
Joe?
Well, no one wants to see the spread of disease among intravenous drug users. No one wants to see children and citizens being accidentally poked by dirty, discarded needles either. I'll find a better way to solve this problem than with an unsupervised, unaccountable, nonprofit organization that has lost track of over 25,000 needles. I don't think the commission that Kim set up to oversee the Hatcher situation is really going to do much. It's basically just a fig leaf. Like I say, I work at HSU. You know, anytime they have a problem, they set up a commission. You never hear about it again. As far as misinformation, a lot of it is not a lot of it is real information. I take the bus to work every day. And I myself have found lots of needles. You know, all of you know I pick up trash, you know, habitually all over the city when I'm walking back and forth to the bus. I've even found 2 of those needle boxes, you know, the red ones you're supposed to put the syringes in that they've broken open and taken needles out. There weren't even any needles for me to find and get rid of. So no, the Hatcher people definitely kind of made a hash of this whole thing. I think it was a mistake for the council to even invite them in or let them in. I don't know how it all happened and what went down, but that was a big mistake. The liberal needle regimen has magnetized the city to attracted more drug users, and in addition, it's magnetized the city to more drug pushers because there's more customers. So, you know, something has to be done. It's something that the county is going to take over, and we're going to forbid it in the city here. I'm all for that.
Kim? I base my policies and ideas on facts and scientific information and evidence. I've been to public health in Sacramento to discuss this conversation about what the benefits and the not so benefits of syringe exchange are. But syringe exchange isn't the only issue that we're talking about here. We're talking about a lot of different issues where things aren't really truthfully put out there. There's a way that you can skew whatever you want to talk about. So what I do is I research and I talk to all different people and I talk to different sources and resources because I think it's important to look for and ask better questions. And so that's how I believe in science. I mean, there are people that don't believe in climate change. So I believe that scientific evidence is critical to moving forward in our community and in our world. Michelle?
As mayor, as mayor, I believe you need to take the entire community's concerns and responses to issues into consideration. I also believe it's imperative that constituents feel heard and represented. It is also just as imperative to take in the facts and data. You cannot base any decision solely on the community's claims. Policies need to be based on facts, transparency, and research, and not on opinion and emotion. If elected, I will take every bit of information into consideration, including solid facts, before ensuring any policy.
Heidi. Well, it's been said, trust but verify. And I think it's important that we always do that with every single instance of policy making and policy change. It's something that we have to look at no matter what. We need to look at facts, but we also need to verify facts. One of the things that Kim and I both went to Sacramento together, and in this particular instance, there was research that was handed to us, and I did my background on that research, and there was some problems with the research. So I actually do have a wide amount of information and facts that I'm challenging the particular agency we're talking about to uphold. And it's one of the reasons why we continue to have the conversation and continue to move forward with, for instance, the Community Advisory Committee, as well as the ordinance we put in place. But facts are critical no matter what happens. And when you're standing in front of a camera, it is very important to always speak honestly and factually. And if we don't have facts, to be able to say that. I'm sorry, I don't have that information, but I will get back to you with that. So that's an important thing, particularly for the mayor, because the mayor will stand before people on a regular basis and will need to be able to speak factually and truthfully and honestly.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of the 2018 Eureka Candidates Forum. Let's again thank